Welcome to the Speaker Meeting, a space where we break the silence one story at a time. Every episode, you'll hear from someone who's been there, through the struggle of addiction, the turning point into recovery, and the journey after. Because no matter where you are, you're not alone. Recovery is possible, and hope is real. My hope is that by sharing these stories, you'll believe it to be true. My name is Chibi. My sobriety date is April 5th, 2024, and this is the Speaker Meeting.
My name is Steven Finesse Flores, and my starting recovery date is December 26th, 2016.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Stephen. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. Before we started, I asked you to pick a random tarot deck and a random card from said deck. I don't know how familiar you are with tarot.
Not at all.
Okay, great.
That's the first time I've ever picked a card.
Really?
Yes,
all
ever.
right. Well, the purpose of this is really not so much a like divination of sorts, but it's a way to kind of ground the conversation, right?
Okay.
And the card that you picked was Temperance, and Temperance is a card about balance, integration, and healing. It shows up when you are learning how to hold both light and shadow, to practice patience, and to blend all parts of ourselves into something whole. You know, in recovery, it speaks to the daily work of progress over perfection and the wisdom in slowing down to stay grounded. And I'm wondering, how does this card resonate with you and your recovery journey?
Well, to be completely honest, I didn't know what that meant. So thank you for reading that. I figured it had something to do with temper. And ants is maybe the balancing part of it. I don't know if we break it down. But what you just read speaks very loud and clear about where I feel that I am in just being so comfortable in my own skin that the need to do anything that is mind altering is a void because to live in this element and actually live and not exist is the most beautiful thing I've ever encountered, you know, and for most of my life at, 49 years old is when I had that awakening.
Okay.
You know, so, I feel like that definitely, the universe is powerful, right? Is exactly where I'm at is maintaining that balance. And, in the book on page 417, it talks about inverse proportions and making sure. And that's one thing that I really hold to is making sure I'm not putting myself in places with people or things that can keep me from being having those inverse proportions so that I have more serenity on my side than anything else, rather than having any little thing tick me off. Yeah.
And if you look at the card, usually it's depicted as a figure that's kind of like mixing a liquid between two cups, right? And it's I like how that relates to the idea of like in recovery, we're not, trying to run away from the bad, right? Because life will happen and, life isn't always going to be serene and wonderful and all joyous, right? So it's learning about how to blend both the joy and the discomfort and live in a balanced state between the two.
Yes. And that's really powerful because that's, I think, one of the things that is necessary, obviously stop using. That's necessary. But also it's like, let's start working on those behaviors, and if I don't take an opportunity that makes me feel a kind of way to learn about myself, I kind of go to extreme because I'm an addict, but so to me, that's like a relapse, I mean, it's serious. Like, and so I I don't put myself in places where I'm going to start thinking these like, you know, cynical SIN.
I love that.
Cynical thoughts and have judgment because I'd rather just see the person as a person and not remember the last stupid thing they said.
Yeah.
Like labeled, you know, by my own idiocracy. But
there by the grace of God,
right,
go I.
Hello. And so it's really important that, you know, we do those 2 cups and we're taking the good and pouring some in and taking the bad and deconstructing it.
Yeah.
You know, why is this bad to me? Why does it make me feel these things?
Yeah.
And
it's a card that often alludes to this idea of like alchemy too, right? And taking something and morphing it into something else.
Yes.
And I think that's a big part of recovery. I mean, for me, I'll speak for myself, which is like taking my past, right, and everything that I've been through, and finding a way to morph that into an agent of good, versus chaos.
100%. I feel like that is, you know, why things have in my life. You know, 2019, I nearly died, but I lived because I'm still here to talk about it. In 2020, we had COVID as a world, but 2020 was my most magical year. Completely magical. You know, like just one day at a time, me, my little corner of the world, very little. And yet the most beautiful year of, you know, getting into, you know, an industry, a professional industry that I had no idea I would ever be able to have again. And so being able to look back at that 2020, which is a very traumatic year for everybody in the world, if you were living. And even those who I said earlier, or just existing because of a drug use or, you know, a situation that we might not be aware of. Very important that all of us suffered this trauma. And, you know, nonetheless, I still can look back at that year and know it was an amazing year of growth and direction from the universe and really kind of looking at life for real in a mirror. Yeah.
Well, let's take it back because you mentioned that you started your recovery journey at 49, I think you said. But what was your relationship with substances or addictive behavior? Like, how did that start, and when did that start, and how did that progress? Okay,
I think, you know, we can go back as far as a little child before I ever picked up a drug. You know, my parents, my father was a minister and my mom was a minister's wife, and she always had a job. If she wasn't the secretary at the church, she always had, you know, some kind of job, and she did very well on her own. But they were both very busy, and I was their first child. And being a dad now, I don't know how it feels to be embarrassed by my children, but I think I embarrassed them. Because I was not like the other boys. And that was, they were reminded of it a lot when we would go out and people would refer to me as their little girl. And the thing that stands out to me is their reaction to that. You know, it wasn't, no, that's my little boy. Or it was like, his name is Steven. And so there was never any, in our family, we never discussed, you know, our feelings about things. We just kept moving forward. And so I don't know if I was hurt. I don't know if I was angry. I didn't know how to communicate those feelings. I just felt them and they just built up. And so those, Dr. Gabor Mate talks about in his most recent book, The Myth of Normal, and small T's and big T's, you know. So I look at that and I would consider that as a small T because that was happening, but it wasn't like this severe, tragic thing.
Sure.
But looking back in retrospect, it's definitely, small t's, like these attitudes and these feelings that I didn't know how to express. I didn't know whether it would even matter, but I didn't express those feelings. And those feelings turned into me learning how to manipulate because of it, right? So I could sense, how I got away with it is I would ask for something because of how they felt. And so to assuage their guilt, they'd buy me anything or give me anything rather than have a discussion.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was the very beginning of my little addict inner child. And I learned how to use that. And then later, I had someone that was sexually molesting me. He was the assistant to my dad. And so I learned how to manipulate that too, and the thing about that was, so we would consider that a big T, and it is. No child should be touched by someone, anyone other than their parents when they're changing diapers and things like that.
Yeah.
But the thing that I guess the most important thing is I actually really liked it as a child. It wasn't weird. It was very natural. And I went looking for him. Like it flipped because I learned how to manipulate him to get what I wanted anytime I wanted it.
Yeah.
And if he didn't give it to me, I was going to tell somebody. So it was and that was, definitely before I picked up cocaine at the age of 14. And that was just me hanging out with a bunch of older people who, I thought I was living the life.
Yeah.
And now they were just using me. I realized that I was just a doormat, basically my whole life, to do anything to feel some kind of acceptance or some kind of inclusion or, I would do anything to get the opposite of what I felt at the breakfast table with my mom and my dad when the waiter or waitress would say, "How's your little daughter?"
Yeah.
That feeling, I'd do anything to get rid of that.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah. It was that because you mentioned, things weren't talked about. And so then inside things were building and building and building and building. When you discovered cocaine or other mind altering substances, was that like the release? Like, were you able to kind of like, open the floodgates and whatever was building, let it out?
Chibi, that's a great question. I don't know if it actually released anything, but it made me escape it.
Okay.
I looking back at my life, it wasn't until, doing this 12 steps through Cocaine Anonymous where I went and learned about the 12 steps. That was what kind of started helping me see the process to release things and the health, the health that it brings by truly releasing. Because I never understood that I had to, I was the victim. I played victim my whole life. So for me, when I played victim, I used that too to justify my shit show. So I don't think there was any release. It was just mind altering so that I didn't have to feel
what was going on.
Right.
Yeah. I literally earlier today just saw a clip of this poet author, Ocean Vuong, and he was talking about how, like all of us can be victims of something, right? Victims of sexual abuse, victims of war, victims of poverty, victims X, Y, and Z, right? But what we can do is choose whether or not to live in victimhood.
Right.
And that's, the choices that we make that define our lives.
Right.
So you said, you first discovered cocaine at 14, but you didn't really begin your recovery journey until 49, right? That's 35 years.
A lot of years.
Yes, I did math. How did that progress? Like, what was the progression there? Or, what were those 35 years like? Because that's a long time to be living in active addiction.
I did know I had a problem. I mean, I wasn't like the people that look. I was very unassuming, and I was a functional addict, and could lie, and that was my life. So those 35 years were, I moved from Chicago to San Antonio in 1991. I believe that's 34 years ago. And, the first 25 years of my life were just, there were a lot of great times, but there were a lot of times, I would drink to black out, and I didn't realize that was a problem. I would do cocaine, MDMA all the time. I didn't think that was a problem. It was just, but it was a problem because I wasn't going to the hospital. There was nothing happening.
Yeah.
It was just fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it went from, social to this chronic, where it's just the thing that you're doing all the time. You're not, I was not living for work and putting myself into a art of any sort or a profession of any sort. I was doing that just to sustain the nighttime life, or I was working on manipulating somebody to continue my my life that was completely fake and not who I actually was, because who I actually was that minister's kid, and who I became was someone better than that. In my head, someone better than that little kid, know? And so it was 49 years of literally loneliness. If I look back at at the end of the day, it's about me just wanting to not feel lonely or outliered. So I would do anything with anybody. I mean, I remember stories. Gosh, I think about it now, Chibi, and I'm like, what? I mean, I could have been killed so many times by getting in cars with strangers. We're going to go get that deal. And it's in Timbuktu, and I'm in Timbuktu.
Yeah.
And we're not, we're talking like I'd be in Seattle, and we're going to go get this dope. And just sit in the back of the car, in the back seat, on the floor.
Yeah.
So no one knows we're here. And I'm thinking to myself, what insanity.
Yeah.
So things like that happened all the time. And at the time, it was like, no big deal.
Yeah, you just excuse
now
them.
I think the hair on my skin stands up because I'm like, that's just insane. But that was my life. And there's so many little, I remember getting, stuck in the penthouse because the person that owned the penthouse, it was something to do with they had the penthouse, but they came home early or something like that. And so I'm stuck in this penthouse with this other guy that had me there that I shouldn't have been there. And it was like, just what do? You can't go out the window in a tall building in Chicago.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't feel what I'm expressing today. It was just like, it's what you do.
Yeah.
So the fact that I survived many of these little vignettes, today mean the world to me. The near-death experience with AIDS just in 2019 means the world to me. I think that that's where I get my my inner strength, my spiritual inner strength, because I know with all the stupid things that I've done in my life, to be saved from that, and I don't mean like saved in a religious way, but to be allowed to live.
Yeah.
Despite there's a strong spiritual presence around me.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, whatever she is, whatever he is, whatever they are, it's strong.
Yeah.
And I was meant to go through all that so that I could tell this story and hopefully inspire and encourage people who aren't there yet.
Yeah. Well, that's that alchemy we were talking about.
100%. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like that's that word, not knowing. I promise. I never picked a tarot card in my life.
Yeah.
Speaks volumes.
Yeah, really. So you talked about, at 49 with those 35 years of experiencing life as you were, what was the event or series of events that led to the moment of seeking recovery, right? Or looking to change your life?
So, in those 35 years, okay, so I moved to from Chicago to San Antonio, and I started going to this church. This friend that I worked with at a restaurant, she kept inviting me to church, And I was like, I'm not going to church. My father's a minister. I've done the whole thing. Long story short, I went. Another long story short, I got married in this church. And it was one of those churches where I had to say, I hate my homosexuality. Homosexuality is a sin, and Jesus is Lord. And that washed away my sin. And now I was whatever normal is according to that group of people. And I lived the life. I was married. We went on a honeymoon. We did all the things, sex. And it wasn't, and this is not in any disrespect to my ex because she's amazing. But I just couldn't stand it. I did it, but it was, and I'm so selfish. It was very selfish throughout her, and so that marriage of 13 years, we dated for 3 years before that. So we were together for 16 years and we're still very much together raising our now 18 and 19-year-olds. But, and we're better friends today than we've ever been. But that, and then when I got a divorce from that, it plummeted me back into what I didn't know about was Grindr. What I didn't know about were these like apps that was happening in those 16 years because I wasn't on there at all doing anything. I was busy with the church. I was busy. I started a production company to do different theatrical presentations and allowing the community to come for free because that's how we get people to be a part of our church. I wasn't thinking that. I was just thinking, help the children's shelters and have them come to this thing for free. But in the process, we're like meeting people who can help subsidize and underwrite the cost and things like that. And Lisa and I did that very well. Lisa's my ex. And so that went on for several years. So things like that. I was very busy in this 13 years that I was part of this church. And before I knew it, I back to the early child buildup of traumas. Like that's what put me right into, a shooting meth scenario. And I didn't stop for 7 years.
Wow.
And it was, and I feel like, people are like, well, what happened? And I don't know if it was an infected needle or if it was just promiscuous sex, because there was a lot of both. And I was new, so I didn't know. And the person who gave me my first shot, it was already pre-filled. So I don't know where that shot came from or who used it or what.
Right.
But again, the desperation of my inner child wanting to be loved and accepted, I would do anything.
Yeah.
Despite how I felt in my stomach. And so same scenario, hot, gorgeous guy standing in front of me with a tray of syringes filled with meth. Who's going to say no to that? A normie. All right. Maybe. I don't know. But I didn't.
Yeah.
And so because of the level of illness within those 7 years, I think I was infected very early on. And so did the doctors. They're like, is this amount of illness usually happens over about 10 years. But so it probably happened very early on, maybe that first syringe,
maybe.
So that was, so the first thing was like, I think all this trauma built up, and then that trauma led to being a doormat in now the world I always wanted to live because I was married and suppressed for so long. Now I want to be where I wanted to be. And that led me to a hospital bed where I was so sick, Chibi, that I wanted to die. I wasn't living.
Yeah.
And I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't lift my legs. I had to use my arms to lift my legs. I could barely hold up my head. And I wanted to die. I just didn't want to kill myself, but I wanted to die. So when they said, Mr. Flores, can you get a ride over to the hospital across the way? We have a bed waiting for you. I thought that they were going to put a morphine drip and, so long.
Yeah.
But the next morning they came in with a option to do a chemotherapy because the AIDS that I had was Kaposi sarcomas. So it was lesions and all through my intestines and stomach. I had them on the outside of my body as well. They said, there's one thing that we can try on you. It's a 50-50 chance that it'll work. Would you like to try it? And it worked. So that was probably where I really started to make, and at that point still in the hospital bed, I didn't think you're an addict.
Right.
You're sick.
You're sick. Yeah.
You've got to do things differently. And of course, because on chemo, they suggested you don't drink. So I didn't drink.
Okay.
And I didn't do any drugs. I haven't, nothing, but I hadn't come to terms with the fact that I had a problem with addiction, very far removed from understanding any of that. But it was then that I look back at that now, and it's definitely when would be considered my bottom.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So then when was that concept, I guess, of being an addict, when was that kind of introduced, right? Because oftentimes, we don't even understand the concept of it, right? So when was that introduced, and what were the steps that you started to take to address that?
And this is powerful. So that year of 2019, I was admitted to the hospital in February. I was there for a month to do 2 rounds of chemo while I was in the hospital just to make sure it would be okay. And then I did chemo through October. Okay. So October 3rd, it was a Wednesday. I had the infectious disease doctor and I had oncology both in the same day. And went to my oncology, and that's where the doctor was said, we got to get you to the hospital. My blood pressure was so low. It was barely I don't remember the day, but I was barely there.
Yeah.
I was pretty close to being dead. And so, in those 9 months, October 3rd, I got clearance saying your HIV is undetectable and your cancer's in remission. And so I was like, great. I got in my car, drove to Palm Springs to go see a friend, hung out there for a couple of weeks. And this person, I've known him from my days in Chicago. And he just served the heck out of me. And it was just a great time to rekindle. But that same month at Halloween, I went out for one drink. And I woke up with a dick in my ass, not knowing at all what was going on.
Right.
That was when I thought, I have a problem. Because I hadn't suffered enough consequences. And so, again, at the time, I didn't realize that. I'm looking back in retrospect, you're asking me. That was when I thought for the first time, this is a problem. Did I do anything about it yet? No, it wasn't until a couple of years later, because she's very stubborn and blind and, and full of herself. So couldn't be me.
All right.
Not like that. I'm not like those people.
Yeah.
You're unassuming, And so I was very tripped up by my own
ego.
My ego. So it wasn't until a couple of years later, I started to get into the business so that all happened in 2019. In 2020, I actually got my first peer recovery coach job at University Health.
Okay.
And so that's when things started to be a little bit more structured. It was like the universe teaching me things about myself without someone telling me. I was doing this job. And so, you're doing a job and you're saying, well, this is this. I'm working with people in recovery. I was in recovery. I just wasn't in like the 12-step recovery. I wasn't in smart recovery. Yeah. I was in recovery. My brain was shifting, whether I wanted it to or not. The universe was like, girl, she's going to make you change if she needs you to change.
Right.
When she needs you to change. And so, so those things were happening. And so I think probably my ego, this is the positive part of my ego. My ego is like, okay, well, you got to get your shit together. If you're telling these people what to do or encouraging them as a peer recovery coach, you encourage, you don't tell anybody what to do.
Yeah.
And because of the time that I was in that church, I really learned how to never make someone feel a kind of way. If there's that like obligatory expectation in anything without being said directly and asking, I'm out. Don't assume I'm going to come to your thing or volunteer for this or do this or that just because I'm there. That's what we did in that church all the time. You want to be a part of this church? You got to do this, 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 and this. And I get it. I do. I get it. I see that live and well, and I know it works if it's done the right way and if we're compassionate and loving and forgiving, but my experience in those 13 years married and not with my ex-wife, but with this church, very much obligatory expectations. And it was just expected that you were going to do certain things, not asked. And if you said no or anything was opposite, you had to have a really good excuse or there really wasn't a good excuse.
Yeah.
So after that, I see these things and I, would take people to meetings because that was my job. I'll meet you at a meeting. You don't feel like going, I'll go. And so little by little breaking down like, okay. And so then in 2021 or 2020, I think it was 2020. It was 2020 because we were still kind of in fear of going into spaces together. In 2020, I went to my first CA meeting just for me. And it spoke to me because I had never been to a meeting, at random Club 12 or wherever.
Sure.
I would go with clients, but I never went just for me. And so I went, and it was 2 years of absolute bliss. It was wonderful. Not every interaction was wonderful, but if I look back at that time, it was a huge time of growth for me. I went through the 12 steps. I'm not a 12-stepper. I think it's great to have, for me, a process to follow. And in that process, for me, I've been speaking universe. God spoke to me there. The sunlight of the spirit, the way that certain things were introduced, I could accept that because now I started to see a broader God rather than this very siloed, one-dimensional God that I learned about as a child.
Yeah.
While I'm, feeling all these things.
Yeah.
And so when I felt this immediate acceptance and inclusion, and doesn't mean that humans weren't human, but it was a time for me to really kind of look at myself. And that's where I learned, I think the most invaluable thing that I've learned in my recovery is making sure my side of the street is fine. And that doesn't mean, for me, it doesn't mean that I'm always nice, and I'm not. Because I will say what I feel, but I'm better than I was.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm a work in progress. I didn't go and get baptized like I did in that church. And all of a sudden you're like this new person.
Yeah.
This is a work in progress. Yep. Like everything that happened in my life has been part of that journey. And so for me to look back, I think that is when the lights really started to go on. And I started to really I was taking my job very seriously. So that's what encouraged me to start doing some work without knowing there was work, right?
Yeah.
How do you make this up? I made shit up all my life. So, so now that I'm trying to live with integrity, not just say it, I felt compelled to do some step work, and I had, a couple of different sponsors, but a couple in a couple of years.
I mean, that's
my ego.
Yeah, exactly. But that again goes back to that alchemy that we were talking about of like the teachings, the teacher then becoming the student of sorts, right? Yeah. And it's kind of just coming right back to it and finding a way to turn that into something else, right? You're imparting that wisdom onto somebody else, and somehow it came right back to you and put you in that direction. So then what does life in recovery look like now, and how do you keep moving forward?
Oh, well, because of those 2 years that I had with self and doctors and therapists and really the support of people before I was cognizant of actual programming in recovery, I think that's one of the things that today is so profound, because my recovery wasn't based in the very beginning of a 12-step or SMART or, treatment center or anything like that. It was really me relying on getting through the day before I learned about, one day at a time.
Yeah.
And so my God-given ability, to lean on those laurels of what God has done for me, and don't get it twisted. I'm not talking about the God that we learned about in church. Like I just call God, universe,
the
to
God
make it
of
simple,
our understanding.
this big thing that's bigger than me.
Yeah.
And it could be a little bigger than me. I don't know. It could be ginormous.
Yeah.
But my gift of having those 2 years before I actually went into a 12-step program, that actually connected me closer, because it was ambiguous, this thing that I had with God or the universe or whatever they are. And then when I went to the 12 steps, I saw the sunlight of the Spirit. I felt the sunlight of the Spirit. I felt it, but my ego wasn't allowing me to say it.
Yeah.
I wasn't secure in saying that, because there's a lot of stuff there with church and all the things that I've had in my past. But, to be able to today not walk away from people, but walk away from rooms that no longer serve me, and rely on God. How are you doing it? Well, the way that I did it before I ever came here.
Yeah.
Because there's some good out there, right? And I don't know them, but there's many people who don't go to 12 steps and recover.
Yeah.
Whatever that is for them. And that's, and honestly, so part of that journey, Chibi, has been like, before I even knew it was a thing, harm reduction. I consider myself a harm reductionist because I see the value in, one of the principles in harm reduction is social cultural factors. And we call it cultural humility. And what that means is, what it means for me is, in order for me to ever help you, I had to shut my mouth and listen to you.
Yeah.
Right. And so, even if we're neighbors, I don't know your life. I know your address. I don't know what's going on in the house. And we never know. And sometimes that individual doesn't know. I didn't have these, this attitude or this insight in the middle of my addiction. Nothing. And so those are some of the things that I feel why my life is the way that it is today is because I do a total reliance on God. I do the breath work. And I need that.
Yeah.
I absolutely need that. It's what carried me before the 12-step programming and, licensed chemical dependency counselor, intern, and all these things I've learned, because I want to learn. I don't want to learn for the letters behind my name. I just want to learn.
Yeah.
And if it means something to somebody, fine. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter to me. I learned, So, and that's the same attitude I have with an individual interaction. To be able to walk away, and I don't spend time with people that I'm not going to, walk away with great taste in my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that doesn't happen. But then guess what? We don't hang out that much.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And then some people, I get it. Are really busy, but I got to infuse grace into my expectation of a friendship or my expectation of how I think things should go. And that's all very new because I sit in Resentmentville, that I have mansions. I have a whole subdivision in Resentmentville. But so today, it's like complete reliance on God, like this thing that is bigger than me. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it doesn't have to be that much bigger, just a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And I will put myself in check. And I guess it's one of the gifts that I get is the ability to take every interaction, with a person or a place or a thing as an ability to learn and open up that treasure chest of what I need to learn today. And some things you throw away and some things you store and compartmentalize and organize them and respect them and love them.
Yeah.
Despite how you feel, because if I really want to, I need to learn how to navigate my feelings, rather than anything else.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you brought all that up because that's also part of the reason for this podcast is to show the different avenues that people get to where they do in their recovery, right? And we've had people on here that are 100% 12 steppers, and we have people that have mixed a few things and harm reduction, right? The idea that it is a lot to go back to the alchemy of it all, to take what works for you, the wisdoms that you're learning from here, there, wherever, and make that into a way of living that works for you and keeps you, on the right path.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really, and we have such a, in our culture today, and I'm not talking about the gay culture, I'm just talking about in our humanity.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to use what this idea of harm reduction that has been around forever, to really pivot and teach, so like a lot of the things that we see in life, like these microaggressions, can be used instead of to create angst, to educate. And it's just about framing that situation and allowing, if they allow it, if they don't allow it, I always ask you, this is a great opportunity to learn something. Would you be open to, a little bit of insight?
Yeah.
And again, it's how you say it, So, and more often than not, it is requested. Is that, what do I need to learn? Some people don't understand the concept of microaggressions and how damaging these little T's are.
Yeah.
How many years can we go on with these little T's that are microaggressions?
Yeah.
Not really speaking how that really hurt my feelings when you called me faggot or whatever. And so, yes, it's like I said, I wouldn't pop off. I was passive aggressive, right?
Yeah.
But the idea of harm reduction in interacting, we have so many opportunities, especially as gay individuals, to address those things and educate rather than put up a wall, you know? And I think that that's one of the biggest problems that I have seen is these walls go up so quickly and we miss an opportunity to actually grow. You know, it's like you build up this wall, there's no sun, and guess what? No photosynthesis, and we die.
Yeah.
And so the opposite of that, I don't know what the scientific word is, growth, is for me, that's the opportunity we have at every interaction.
Yeah.
You know, at every interaction. Because there is nothing that it wasn't planned or meant to be.
Yeah.
Whether, that's in my gratefuls today, it's like, I'm never late. Right. And I literally am never late, but sometimes I'm late. But in my mind, like, okay, if there was this and this, and I'm supposed to be, it's one thing going in a job interview. You want to kind of plan that.
Yeah.
But even that, like, okay, well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
The job is either going to be mine or not. Like that's just like a tangible, obvious thing. But, just being late for someone's dinner or something like that, like that was when I was supposed to be there.
Exactly.
Because I'm not going to fight against what happened.
Yeah.
That's just insanity.
You're where you're supposed to
and
be.
I
when
bring
you're
that energy
be
into that space, and then other people feel that energy or not. But it's not a happy place to live.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely learned a lot in this conversation. And I hope our listeners have too. Thank you for sharing it. Are you ready to get into some rapid fire?
Sure.
All right. So,
rapid fire.
Okay, and feel free to take your time with it. Fill in the blank. Recovery has given me
life.
What's one word you'd use to describe your recovery journey?
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
What's a daily habit or ritual that keeps you grounded?
Prayer, meditation.
If you find yourself struggling or triggered, what's the first thing you do?
I call a friend.
This or that, morning routine or night routine?
Am I supposed to say this or that?
Whichever one.
Morning routine.
Or both.
Morning routine for all my grounding spiritual stuff.
Okay.
Night routine for physical activity, for workout.
There you go. Meditation or movement?
Both. I like to meditate while stretching.
Talking it out or writing it down?
Talking it out.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Name one book, song, or movie that's been meaningful to your recovery.
A Beautiful Life.
A piece of advice you return to when things get tough.
It's going to be okay.
A phrase or mantra that keeps you going.
In the St. Francis prayer, it talks about this always grounds me. Comforting others. Comforting. Okay, it always grounds you. Comforting, loving, and what's the third one? Understanding. Comforting, understanding, and loving others more than I feel like I need to be comforted, understood, and loved. Always grounds me because at the end of the day, I'm here to serve. And sorry, it's not a rapid fire. I'm going into a tangent.
It's totally fine. It's totally fine. And if someone hears your story today, what's one thing and takes one thing away from it, what do you hope it is?
That it encourages them to get honest.
Because that's where it starts.
Yeah. Step one, I have to just be honest. And I work with certain people. Well, not certain people. I work with people. And that is my number one thing. We see it and we see the train wreck about to happen. But it's not my place to say anything. It just has to happen because I am not God.
Yeah.
And so, but in time after time, people who I see are relapsing, it's generally two things. but they're both A's. There's, not A1 or A2. They're both A. It's either their inability to get completely honest or their inability to actually have experienced the truth and had that epiphany of something that had happened.
Yeah.
Because the mind did whatever it did to protect. And so there's a blackout there, but there's something, I've seen both sides. And as soon as they start to, oh my gosh, I can't remember about this. I just remembered about this thing that happened to me. And that's a maladaptive behavior. How do we get honest about something our brain turned off so that we wouldn't have to live with that thought in our head until today?
Yeah.
Now what do I do? Right. And so those two things, what I have learned have been a pretty high percentage of why people don't stay on their recovery journey. I don't like saying sobriety because that means so much, and it could hurt people.
Yeah.
Because if they mess up, some people don't feel like they could ever go back.
Right.
And that I've seen with two different individuals very close to me, they're no longer here because of that very thing. They never felt like they could be completely whole again.
Right.
And, but so their recovery journey, I think that that's one of the things that it's really important to acknowledge and remind people in our community it's a journey.
Yeah.
We don't arrive.
That's right.
We don't go through the 12 steps and not work on our behaviors the rest of our life.
Exactly.
That's not recovery.
Exactly.
And so I'm here to encourage that at the end of the day, just stand. You can get off the path, just don't go too far.
Yeah. Right.
Because that distance can kill us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your recovery journey.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for inviting. This is amazing.
Of course.
Thanks, Jimmy.
That's it for this episode of The Speaker Meeting, breaking the silence one story at a time. A huge thank you to our guests today for sharing their journey with us. Recovery isn't easy, but conversations like this remind us that we're not alone and that change is possible. If you're struggling, know that there is help and there is hope. You don't have to do this alone. For immediate support, you can reach out to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration Helpline at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7. And if you'd like to share your own story, I'd love to hear from you. You can submit your information at geminisproductions.com/thespeakermeeting. And if this conversation meant something to you, help us spread the word. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. The more we talk about recovery, the more we remind people that they are not alone. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and remember, recovery is real.